Prime Minister not to exceed 7 minutes.
The government would like to propose the proposition that the U.S. should cease all drone strikes. We would like to clarify this by defining drone strikes as military strikes enacted by automated drones. Basically our plan will be enacted by Congress and the President, and this plan will basically stop drone strikes in both foreign and domestic territory. So really, the reason why we use drones is because of their simplicity. That essentially they're extremely easy to use, easy to enact onto foreign soil, and that has somewhat caused a major problem in territories, especially in the Middle East. And it is the government's contention that because of these problems, the United States should stop its drone strikes before it causes even more damage than it has already done. So my first reason to stop these drone strikes is because these drone strikes are killing innocents. Basically, what we have in the current system is that we have these drones attacking essentially large. They have these specific targets, but because of the way these drones work, they end up hitting basically a lot more people than they often intend to, and this ends up with a lot more deaths than normally intended. And it ends up with a lot of innocent people being killed. Now, a lot of statistics claim that the majority of these people are combatants, but the fact is that the United States policy classifies combatants as anyone that dies in these drone strikes that is 18 or older. So basically, anyone above this age that is killed by a drone strike is classified as a combatant. Yes.
But when you're comparing all of our military, we definitely see that drone strikes have the least of the KD ratio, especially in recent weeks. But other than that, we still have to fight wars in many places where it's justified. How are you going to do that more effectively and efficiently with less lives killed without drones?
Because we argue that drones basically end up in more innocent lives being killed, and more people dying than really don't deserve it. We're not just killing terrorists here. We're also killing many innocent lives from people who are caught in the crossfire. We can see this isn't just hurting adults, this is also hurting many children. Hundreds of children are caught in these drone strikes, and we've actually seen an enormous amount of children killed by these drone strikes. And we've seen that this has caused really a detrimental effect to these countries, because basically we have not only innocent adults being killed, but innocent children. My second point is basically the simplicity of drones causes these problems with it. My first reason why is because it causes overuse of drones. Because drones are so easy to use, we end up using them far too much. We over prioritize them on targets. We attack many more buildings than we should, and we end up staying in these countries a lot longer than we would intend, because drones are so easy and so simple to keep inside these countries. So because of these drone strikes, we end up keeping these drones in these countries really much longer than they really should be, and we use them a lot more often because of their simplicity and their efficiency. So my third point is that it actually increases terrorism. That because of these drone strikes, we actually can see that there's actually we've actually seen an increase in terrorism because of this. We actually have 40 confirmed suicide bombings who have basically enacted these suicide bombings because they had people they knew who were killed in drone strikes. And we know that drone strikes are a direct cause of these terrorist bombings, so we can see that in these countries, this is just one piece of evidence that we're actually increasing terrorism in these countries. Once people see that it's the United States that's attacking these nations, attacking these areas with their drones, then they really lash out against the United States, which in turn increases it increases the power of terrorist groups in these unstable nations, which in turn causes more instability. So in turn, it's just a cascading effect. The more we use these drone strikes, really the more it hurts the Middle East, the more these terrorist groups gain power, and the more it actually ends up hurting us overall. So my fourth point is that it basically keeps us in these countries longer than we should be, because while in many of these countries we don't have an active presence of troops, we do have an active presence in drones. And this is basically because they're, as I said earlier, they're really easy to use, they're simple, and we don't need to have these enormous costs to keep a large group of men on the ground in these areas. We just keep these simply keep these drones here, and what this causes is that we end up staying in these countries a lot longer than we normally would have, or we basically put our drones in countries which we otherwise don't have troops in, and we basically end up really prolonging these conflicts much longer than they really need to, really should be. Actually, I'll take your question just before.
Yeah, you keep saying a lot of things like we use them more than we should, we bomb more buildings than we should, and we stay in them longer than we should. What do you mean by should?
What do I mean by should? I mean that really it should be as little as possible. I don't have a specific number of how many drone strikes are needed, but basically we can see when we're killing innocents, people that really don't don't deserve to die, when we have people getting caught in the crossfire, and we have innocent children being died, then we definitely have more drone strikes than we should. Really, the point of this is that these drone strikes are really being overused today. We can see that it's causing enormous loss of innocent lives, and it's basically and when I say we're staying longer in these countries than we should, after our troops have really left the area, we keep these drones in, and we keep bombing these areas with these drones, even while the rest of our troops have gone. So that's what I mean by we stay there longer than we should. So basically, for all these reasons, because of these drones are too simple to use, because we're overusing them, because innocents are dying, I urge, I'm happy to propose. Thank you.
The House thanks the Minister for his eloquent remarks. We now call upon the Madam Leader for a speech not to exceed 7 minutes. I assume you're the leader.
Yes, yeah.
It's so good.
Everyone ready? Okay. I'm going to kind of jump right in here. I'd like to also provide a little bit of a weighing mechanism. We're going to be arguing on side op that we're going to be looking at the best interests of the United States in this round. We do feel it's important to look at the United States as kind of the benefits for the United States as the most important, because we're arguing the United States government really shouldn't be acting against its own interests. So that is how side op is going to be approaching this round. Moving into kind of a couple points of refutation. First, as I brought up in my POI, opening government talks a lot about we do this more than we should, we strike more buildings than we should, we have a lot of targets. This is not really clarified even after the POI that I ask. And I'm asking this because we do have a system in place currently to decide who these targets are, why we're keeping these targets active, why we are still targeting these areas, and why we're still using drones in these areas. There is a reason for that. It is a vetted process that was created along with the technology as we develop drones. So we argue on side opposition that the government argument that we're doing this more than we should, there needs to be a little bit more kind of information there before we can actually contend with that. Now, I'd also like to move on. Their first point, and kind of their largest point here, it seems, is the killing of innocents. And this is actually going to directly clash with our first point here. And we're saying that maybe perhaps the implementation, how we have implemented drone strikes, could possibly be flawed. Maybe the United States needs to revisit its policy. But we don't think that all drone strikes, are inherently bad. And because of that, we think it would be faulty, it would be not in the best interest of the United States to get rid of something that does have benefits, just occasionally may not be the best solution. And we can change that through looking at our policy. We should not be eliminating things completely. Again, there is a system in place, maybe that could be revisited, and hopefully that would probably minimalize how many innocent civilians, as opening government is saying, are being killed from these strikes. I'll take your point.
I'd like to ask exactly how have we implemented it wrong, and what change could we make really that's going to stop drone strikes from killing innocents?
So talking about how you're saying about killing innocents, maybe we should look into how our targets are moving and try and target them at a point where they are not surrounded by innocent civilians. Maybe we could try a little harder to get them at that moment in time versus another. I'm not 100% sure, but all I'm saying is I don't think, you're not providing me any argument why all drone strikes should be removed. You're just saying that sometimes there are bad consequences. And we are arguing on side opposition that that is largely in how we implement drone strikes, not that drone strikes are bad. So moving into, the next point, and how it increases terrorism. We're going to argue actually that this is why we need drone strikes. And that's going to be, my third point of new material. First, I'm going to be talking about how the United States has an obligation to protect its citizens, and this is why we need drone strikes. So Obama has said that his administration has a mandate to kind of withdraw troops from the Middle East and make sure that we bring as many Americans home safely as possible. What we're doing when we have drone strikes is we are not committing more American boots to the ground. We're trying to take them out, and we're using technology that we can implement that will carry out the missions that we need in order to keep that area safe, our own citizens safe, and our nation's security, our national security, without endangering American citizens. So already we have the Obama administration giving that reasoning behind it. Secondly, there's something called the authorization to use military force. This was a piece of legislation that was passed after 9/11, specifically to target kind of this evolving threat, which is going to be my next point. But the reason that we argue we should continue to use drone strikes is because it has been used as an effective way to attack terrorist threats, threats that are not easy to track, threats that are different than we have historically been able to approach. So we're not just meeting on a battleground, right? There are a lot of like guerrilla warfare tactics or suicide bombings, and we agree that historically, maybe because of flawed implementation of drone strikes, because maybe we're in this testing period, because it is a new technology and we are evolving constantly as we use it, there have been maybe innocent civilians who have been killed that have possibly led to some suicide bombers. But we argue that as we continue to evolve our policy, that's going to be less and less likely to happen. And also, even if we have some terrorism here, not all terrorism is caused by drone strikes, and drone strikes are an important part of actually defending American interests against terrorism. And this brings me to my third point of evolving threats. If we look at people or groups like ISIS or groups like Al-Qaeda, sometimes you have to act quickly. Like if you look even, obviously Osama bin Laden was not taken out by a drone strike, but that was a very covert, very quick mission. That is increasingly what American military operations seem to be heading towards. And all we're saying is that instead of even sending in maybe a SEAL team and endangering those lives, we can actually put a drone strike in some situations and have a successful outcome for the United States interest. That's a benefit that you see on the opposition side. In these remote areas, it's often difficult to actually send troops anyway. So because we're going to be sending more Americans into a dangerous area, why shouldn't we use the technology that we have at hand to approach these issues? It just simply doesn't make sense. The United States would say, no, we should use technology that has been proven to be, yes, it is effective. The government is not arguing it's not effective, just saying that there has been some harms. It is effective. It has been able to successfully prevent more Americans from being involved in some of these conflicts. And that's a benefit. Additionally, citizens from around the world are joining movements like ISIS. They are actually flying. People from America are leaving. People from Europe, France, Germany have already lost like thousands of their own civilians to these causes. Sometimes you need to act quickly, possibly, to prevent them from coming back into your country and suicide bombing your citizens that are still at home. That's a problem that we think could be solved through using drone strikes. And additionally, when we look at economic costs as well, we see that drone strikes are going to be more effective, not only just by saving lives, but also by saving costs. So it's really for all these reasons that any flaws that are already happening can be solved by changing policy, because we have an obligation to protect our citizens and our interests abroad, and we can do this by using drone strikes, and because there are evolving threats that demand a different approach, and we believe drone strikes do fulfill this, I strongly oppose this resolution. Thank you.
thank the Madam Leader for her eloquent remarks. Madam Deputy, it's to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start by repeating some of the points made by opposition, some points that they brought up. The first point that was first brought up in a POI was that what is the definition of more drone strikes than we should do? Well, as my partner already answered, we believe more drone strikes than we should is when we start to kill innocent people, and more innocent people by far than we are actually targeting. That is when we are crossing a line way over the line of how many drone strikes we should be using. A second point is that you said that there is a process involved in finding these targets. Yeah, the process is that they have a vague link to a terrorist organization, and they send strikes out into gatherings where these people are present. That's not an effective process. Again, you argued about the implementation of drones and that you want to develop the implementation of drones. Drones are not specific sniper shots. They're basically small bombs. How are you planning to kill one person with a drone? You're going to have to wait until that one person is away from everybody else, so they're not surrounded by any innocent people at all. And that's kind of what they do already. They target rural areas, not urban areas. They never target urban areas. They target rural areas, and look what happens. Look how many innocent civilians are already targeted. And yes, you said you also said that drone strikes are used to protect U.S. citizens. I'll get to this later, but again, specifically, what purpose is being achieved specifically by murdering random foreign civilians? But I'll get to this protecting citizens point later. To get to my constructive points, first of all, we believe that drones the way that they are being used right now is immoral. Currently, the U.S. uses double tap drones, which is when they send a strike into, say, a wedding or a gathering, sometimes a school or a beach where children are playing, and then when rescuers come, they send another drone. So now rescuers are afraid to go help people who have been struck by drones because they don't want to be injured themselves. Yes.
Okay, so you're saying that innocent civilians die and that's bad, and we argue yes, a lot of war has not great outcomes, right? Innocent people die.
Yes.
But why does this make it very different? Like, why is killing them on the ground, like with boots on the ground, better than drone strikes?
Because when you're in a war with people, you are just by definition, you're not killing as many innocent civilians because there are people there. The ratio of innocents to drone strikes is something like, it's more than 20 to 1. I'm saying 20 to 1 is a generous estimate because I'm not sure the exact figure, but it's definitely more than 20 to 1. This brings me to my next point, which is just the humane element of drone strikes. Drone operators sit in a small room on the ground. They're ending people's lives, sometimes dozens of people's lives with the press of a button. And this, at the end of the day, this minimizes the human aspect, and it teaches soldiers or drone operators, I don't know what training drone operators have to press a button, but at the end of the day, we are killing people, good or bad. They may be terrorists. It may be fine to kill them, but while removing operators from the ground, is great in a certain sense because it removes them from harm, but on the other hand, it lessens the value of the lives being taken. And the U.S. as a country with the #1 military spending, we do not need more people who don't understand the value of human lives that are being taken in foreign countries. My next point that my partner touched on is the production of terrorists because of drone strikes. As we've already said, drone strikes are not effective in killing 1 or 2 specific people. You can't kill 1 or 2 specific people with drone strikes, so you do end up killing family members and neighbors and people around the target. You said protecting American citizens. Are you aware that American citizens have been killed by drone strikes? Teenage American citizens have been killed by drone strikes in Yemen, and I believe one was in Pakistan. There are videos on YouTube of drones randomly coming in, and then people get up and they literally start swearing at the camera and saying, I'm going to get America back for this, I'm going to go join the nearest rebel group I can find. We are basically producing terrorists. That is, you can say that not all drones create terrorists, because of course not all terrorists are created, you can say not all terrorists are created by drones, because of course they're not all created by drones, but drones do undeniably create terrorists, and we argue that when you're weighing up the benefits of killing random, combatants who are 18 plus foreign males versus creating terrorists who we know are being created, we have confirmed terrorists who have been created because of drone strikes killing their family members or their neighbors or just being generally let on their where they live. We argue that the cost to our citizens is worse. We are, in fact, not protecting our citizens by sending drone strikes to random people. Okay, so the difference basically between drone strikes and other military methods, again, another point that we had to write is that it's a difference between civilian casualty in rural areas where they are not technically, a lot of civilians who get hit by drone strikes in areas where they have not been hit before are not actually aware that the U.S. is sending drones, or, yes.
Okay, so you're either going to choose, like, you don't want to fight these wars at all, like, permanent independence from that, or you're going to choose another method to fight these wars. Which route are you going to take, and what exactly is that going to entail?
Okay, I'm going to ask you, there are drones being sent in Pakistan. I don't understand the purpose of sending these drones for Pakistan. If you can come up and say the purpose of these drones, because personally, side off, we don't understand what the purpose of this is in terms of foreign policy. Yes?
When nations such as Pakistan provide asylum to individuals such as Osama bin Laden, among other terrorist outfits, then we believe that sending drones to these countries is essential to upholding American interests.
But again, by doing that, you're killing innocents, and you're not protecting American citizens because you're creating more terrorists. The U.S. does not have an unending war on terror. The U.S. does not have an unending war on terror because of the creation of more terrorists. There is an unending war of terrorists. There is a never-ending war on terror because the U.S. keeps creating more terrorists. So as I was saying, the difference between drone strikes and other military methods is simple, is that civilians, when militaries deploy troops, civilians are aware that they are in a war zone. They have, maybe it's not as easy, but they can get away out of war zones. But when we send drones, they appear randomly, seemingly. The civilians at least, they come without warning. So basically we're bombing civilians who are not in cities the U.S. is actively at war with, and they are in rural areas where there is not as much medical help. Okay, so to summarize our argument, we believe drones are immoral. We believe that as a military method, they are very ineffective, and that's why you should vote for the government.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. Have I called you, sir? Has the House recognized you? No, we haven't. We haven't recognized them, have we? Poor form. This is British parliamentary debate. What's going on? I'm just kidding. You're so recognized.
Good joke. Yeah.
I could feel the tension. It was palpable. It was good. We'd be honored.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before I move on to my constructive case and my points of refutation, let me once again repeat the motion for the convenience of the House and to also point out certain flaws in how the government has been addressing this motion until now. The motion states that the United States should seize all drone strikes. Not only have they failed to specify why only the United States, among a large number of countries which currently use drones as a means to achieve their ends, should seize drone strikes, why it should seize all drone strikes, and how this policy in itself is effective with regard to American interests on foreign soil. But that aside, ladies and gentlemen, let us now move on to a few points of contention that side opposition has with government. Now they keep repeating the same argument that innocent civilians are being killed, and children are being killed, neighbors are being killed, this and that, and there is an excess of collateral damage with regard to the use of drones in itself. But ladies and gentlemen, with traditional warfare strategies which employ regular airstrikes or explosive devices or any such means, also engender or also entail a large degree of collateral damage in itself. But the difference between both of these modes of warfare is that in one of them there is a potential threat to American citizens or American soldiers who possibly are on ground fighting for US interests, and in this case collateral damage which exists in both modes will only occur in terms of foreign citizens being killed. But we have also addressed this issue of how innocents are being killed and how it is easy to use, so it's being over-prioritized. And we said that this is an inherent flaw with the drone policy or the foreign policy that we currently have at hand. It is not through the use of drones or use of any piece of technology that this is happening. It is because of the manner in which we choose to kill our targets, the manner in which we choose to use our drones in itself. And these flaws could be corrected, and these systems could be improved within the United States, and that framework needs to be, as my partner already brought up, needs to be reapproached. And then they also bring this issue of military spending, and I'm very grateful that they brought up the issue of military spending, because holding or placing American boots on foreign soil is much more expensive than the use of drones, ladies and gentlemen. And in a scenario where the defense sector accounts for a large section of American fiscal policy, we believe that this burden could be eased through the use of drone strikes. And then they also talk about how US citizens were killed, and they were referring to particular cases wherein US citizens in the Middle East who have been associated to have engaged with terrorist outfits such as the Al-Qaeda or such as the ISIS, and such citizens have been killed. And we can see that when these citizens return to the United States and blow up our infrastructure, our parliament, or our World Trade Center, we believe that killing these United States citizens who have been associated with terrorist outfits is acceptable in this scenario. And again, returning to my point of how it's unfair for the United States in particular to restrict drone strikes, wherein countries such as Iran, countries such as China are currently using drones, why should the US stop using drones? It creates an unfair advantage to other countries, and the US seems to be disadvantaged in this scenario. I'll take your point.
I'd like to point out that you already gave this reason. It's because opposition has said that the U.S. is misusing its drones in the status quo.
Yes, we agree that perhaps there is a certain degree of misuse of drones, but that does not mean that the technology in itself is admonished, or how we completely ban this use of technology. We should regulate our use of technology, and we on opposition are completely in agreement with that. Regulate the use of the technology. Change the manner in which you choose to target your enemies. Anyway, moving on, ladies and gentlemen, they bring about this issue of the war on terror and how it's self-sustaining, and because of the use of drones, we're in fact perpetuating this. But despite the reservations of any member of team or any judge in this house, terrorist outfits such as the Al-Qaeda have been reduced to shambles, almost next to shambles today, because of a coordinated approach between drones, other unmanned aerial vehicle strikes, as well as the military on the ground. And with the Obama administration, which recently, won its electoral mandate not once but twice on the promise of retrieving American soldiers back home, we believe that increased drone strikes are inevitable when we have policies such as those in place. But let me also move on to another constructive point, ladies and gentlemen, and that is the politics of image in itself. We believe that when the United States has physical presence in another nation, physical presence in the Middle East or in any other country for that matter, we believe that in fact poses a much greater or that in fact engenders a much greater negative image surrounding the US in itself. We believe that terrorism, as they claim, is in fact formed when you have US soldiers on the ground dictating what to do, when US soldiers on the ground commit crimes regularly in those areas, when rape and other sexual assault and other forms of assault are rampant in US military camps and foreign soil. We believe that this can all be reduced, and we believe that the image that the US currently has in the Middle Eastern countries and and the world as a whole can be corrected through the use of drones in itself. And we also believe that with any technology, the drones can also be improved upon. They believe that accuracy is a problem. Targets are being killed in a very random manner, and a large number of people are being affected by this. But we believe that just as any other technology, this can be evolved, this can be corrected, accuracy could be improved. Or perhaps we will reach a stage in the near future wherein drones can target specific people in itself and serve the interests of the US more accurately. So, for all of these reasons, ladies and gentlemen, for all of the reasons presented by my partner, we believe that side opposition wins this debate. Thank you.
You have our thanks, sir. To the honored member, I'd be delighted to introduce you, sir.
Okay, so the last speaker came up here and basically started out with the idea that we're getting a little off topic and brought us back to the resolution. Well, I would like to focus on the resolution once again and distinguish bottom half from the top half of this argument, and this is where the bottom half is really going to carry itself away and excel because a whole lot has been completely overlooked, and I think it's very important. The topic we're talking about, the United States should cease all drone strikes. That does not include active airstrikes. It doesn't include going in and taking out the enemy where he is. This is exactly where the bottom half distinguishes itself from the top half of the government side, in that the bottom half of the government side, we believe that we absolutely should meet the enemy on his ground. We absolutely should kill the enemy where he lies, because this is a benefit to the United States. So, I'm going to start off with my rebuttal first, then I'm going to go into my three main points of technological issues, tactical ability, and the reduced preponderance of to initiate violent conflict around the world. And this is where the bottom half is really going to distinguish itself, is because we're not just talking about the philosophy, we're not just talking about, oh my god, some people are going to die, because the bottom line is, people are going to die whether we use a Hellfire missile from an F-18 or from a drone strike, not at this time. What we need to look at is the actual military devices themselves, and we need to look at this from a tactical military standpoint, see if we are actually getting the absolute best result from the drones, and the bottom half of government says we absolutely are not. So, first,
So some really important information that I would need to create a good clash in this debate is like, what are the KD ratios like with a lot of the military personnel in comparison, like with the F-22s and a lot of our aircrafts in comparison with like the drone program? Like, which ones have the best KD ratios?
I actually just touched on that right now. I think there's a false assumption built into this drone strike every time we've heard it in a debate, is that drones just kill a bunch of people. The bottom line is they use Hellfire missiles. Okay, a Hellfire missile could be just as easily fired off of an airplane. That would actually have the least amount of collateral damage. Not just because we're not using drones doesn't mean we're not using Hellfires. It doesn't mean we're automatically dropping GBU-52s and leveling an entire village and some. So that it's an inherent problem that people constantly have when debating drones. So they talk about the benefits they said that it comes down to the benefits for the United States, and we're going to share how all of our points are for the United States. They talk about we haven't vetted the technology yet, we're currently vetting it. Well, standby for my main point. One, again with their argument with boots on the ground, saves American lives, main point one is coming. Currently, they said that we're currently implementing it, and the first speaker said this is a testing period. Why are we actively using these drones if it is a testing period, as she said? If it is a testing period, they need to be testing it at the Nevada test site. They need to be testing it at White Sands, Utah, before they implement it. So if this is a testing phase, we need to bring it back home. Also, they say, why the U.S.? Why only does the U.S. have to stop the use of drones? Because the United States is the only one that has been irresponsible and completely wanton in their use of drones overseas. That is why the U.S., not this time. So moving on to my main points. Okay, the first one is the technological issues. Let's talk about one of the major technological problems and show why this is not a benefit for the United States as the model they set up. Recently we lost a stealth drone inside of Iran. How did Iran get this stealth drone? Well, they were able to, not at this time, they were able to track this drone, they were able to hack into it, they were able to tell this drone to land in an airport outside of Tehran. The United States government was able, later revealed that they knew about this flaw, but they sent them out there anyway, okay? That is not a benefit for the United States because now they have our drone technology, they have our stealth technology, and now that belongs to Iran. You don't think Iran's going to use that the first chance they get if they can use it against us? That is not a benefit to the United States at all. And that could cause direct deaths of Americans, not this time. Second, tactical ability of drones. Drones actually do limit the overall, they don't reduce the fog of war as much as you would think. There's no variable zoom on drones. You have between 1 and 400, but you don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's no variable zoom. The zoom on it is 1, 2, 50, 100, 200. Okay? So in that, and I'm pretty sure anybody's seen on YouTube the video of the drone strikes, they're constantly zoomed in on the target. Okay? We can, and they actually miss a lot of what's going on around that if they need to actually wave off and call off. We solve this problem by not using weaponized drones, but by rather just allowing the United States military to use, not this time, to use fighter pilots in this role. They have the ability to look at the battle space and say, okay, do I need to wave off? You don't have that ability when you're zoomed in on 3 people. You can't see what's around them. So you don't lift the fog of war as much as you would think. It actually doesn't happen. That goes for the Reaper, the MQ-88 Fire Scout, it goes for the Predator. They all run off the same system. There's no variable zoom, so it does not lift the fog of war. Go ahead.
What about recently when the United States gave, or was trying to send weapons to Kurdish people to fight against ISIS, and we accidentally gave it to ISIS? Are you saying we should really never kind of send anything without a hand-to-hand transaction?
I don't understand what handing weapons to the Kurds have to do with drones. I mean, we're not giving them drones. We're giving them, assumably, M16s, maybe some weapons, some bombs. The question means nothing. So moving on to my last main point, the reduced preponderance to initiate violent conflict, and also that imperialism the United States have been having. Okay, so moving on to this one. They talk about why use the boots on the ground. Let me tell you why we need to use the boots on the ground. Because if you're worth killing with a drone, you're worth capturing. Why do we kill people with drones? Because they're HVTs, or high-value targets. Okay. High-value target, let's look at that in and of itself. If you're a high-value target, that's assumably meaning that you're a high-level terrorist operative that has intimate knowledge of your operations and activities. Well, let's look at this. You simply go and say, you know what, we're just going to kill them, we're going to kill them, we're going to kill them. This has been the policy of President Obama, and it's wrong because if they're worth killing, they're worth capturing. You're killing a lot of people that have a lot of intelligence that we can gain, that we can take from them to save American lives. You want to talk about saving American lives? We are saving American lives by doing that, by extracting this intelligence from them by any means necessary. So basically the bottom line is by their own method, idea of what's valuable to the United States, I've shown you that it's valuable to the United States to actually not use drones. I've shown you why we actually should be using fighter jets and putting boots on the ground because it's worth it to the United States. And for all these reasons, I proudly propose.
Thank you, sir, for your passionate remarks. See you on November 7 minutes.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, there are 2 major points that I'm going to run in this round that I think are going to give the debate a closing opposition. The first point is basically that drones are the most effective and efficient way to fight a war. We have all agreed in this round that wars and skirmishes, especially tactical skirmishes, coming out of the good remarks by the closing government, definitely do need to be addressed. And what we need to prove in this debate is that drones are the best way to complete all of these missions. And if we do, in comparison with all the ways that they said we can alternatively fight wars, we win this debate because they have not said that we don't want to fight these wars. We did get a comment coming out of the second speaker of government government that basically said, I don't know why we're in Pakistan. It's because northern Waziristan is one of the most 3 dangerous places in the world. When you kill a terrorist there, you save 4 people on average, so like, that's why. But let's go towards rebuttal before I go into my 2 points. Now, first, we need to understand that, and the first point that we heard from the member of government on the tech issues, unfortunately for that point, a lot of the tech issues as far as research and development for boots on the ground and for aircraft other than drones actually gears a lot more towards killing potential. And when we look at drone modifications, especially from 2013 on, it's all set on having a more concentrated blast radius and not killing as many people and even being able to hover for 8 to 10 hours at a time, which I don't think swooping by one time on an F-22 is going to be anything compared to hovering for 8 to 10 hours and actually finding by face identification if this is your actual target and then eventually striking. Also in rebuttal, I want to put a lot of this to rest that we are killing many more people than we are for civilians than we are killing for militants, because we definitely see like a lot of major reports that have totally said otherwise. Like New American Foundation even like totally put this to rest when they've said that 68% of the people we have killed by drone strikes in the 4 major countries that we do this in are militants. And if we even look towards a more recent success, like it's completely the opposite way of what they're saying. Like right now in the last 3 months, as far as our ISIS warfare in northern Iraq, we've actually killed 8 times more ISIS militants and people that are in association with ISIS than civilians. Like our most recent strike had 520 deaths of ISIS civilians, militants, 4 of them high commanding targets, which were projected to have like a 20-to-1 life ratio, killing about 20 people for just them being alive, and there were only 22 civilian deaths there. Like, let's look at the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Everything that they want to stand for, which is every other kind of military personnel going in and trying to find success. Okay, well, we killed 100,000 people within about 10 years who were innocent civilians, and probably about 20 to 30,000 more that we don't want to put on the radar, and we've been using drones for about 5 to 6 years more when we go to the Bush era, and we've killed less than 2,000 people with drones. I don't think there's anything else to say about this, but let's go ultimately to the last thing that we hear. As far as tactical policy, there's no doubt that swooping in and out with the drone is going to be so much better than any other method that is going to absolutely demand that you stay there for at least the medium term. Also, when we're talking about violent conflict, I've already proven that you get significantly more violence when you have the research and development and other methods of warfare that cause much more death, and when you actually get a much more concentrated amount of people being killed who are supposed to be killed rather than civilians with drone warfare. The fact that research and development goes more and more towards them killing less people means that over time this is only going to be clearly a better option than it already is in the status quo. We know it isn't perfect, but it's very much better than everything else. In the past 2 years, it's actually been significantly better than any other type of warfare we've seen in the international community. So first point, drones are the most effective and efficient way to fight a war. Before I go on,
So I'd like to say, you're saying that drones are getting more efficient at killing specific civilians. Then why shouldn't we wait until they're completely efficient? Why should we allow innocents to die right now?
I'm saying that we're going to go in and fight the war however everyone commands it, no matter what. We cannot control some of the actions of like pulling the trigger too early in any case. You get that anyway. But what I'm saying is that when you're killing an 8-to-1 ratio and the 8 are the terrorists, then you're definitely getting a better situation than killing 100,000 innocent civilians and less than 15,000 militants in the time that you were in Iraq. And every other method that you want to talk about when research and development is getting significantly more towards killing more people in every single instance. Like, I don't see the alternative here. But let's go to my first point and some of the specific instances here. The more nuanced reasons are why drones are the most effective and efficient way to fight a war and even to contain a country as far as their homeostasis economically and socially. But first, let's see, they are most able to develop as far as the research and development point that I gave, that we are getting more concentrated situations. But at the same time, you get a lot more accountability with drones. Every single drone program is monitored and everything can be clearly seen by the people up top. And you even get situations where in less than 4 hours of people actually committing a crime and killing an innocent civilian, once they are identified, they actually do get stripped of their rank. And in September of 2014, a 4-star general was actually perfectly taken out of the military with dishonorable discharge when he killed 4 individuals who were not supposed to be killed. You actually get accountability because it is on the screen now. This is the way that we need to be doing it to make sure that every person who messes up, just because they're in the military, definitely does not make a bad name for every good person in the military. We need to single out the people who are breaking the code and then honor the rest of them the way that they should be honored. It is the only way to move forward successfully. But at the same time, let's look at all other major methods, like they rely on the honor system more or less. And that's when you can identify many of the deaths that do happen that we don't unfortunately know about. And on this side, we want to know about every single death, know who caused it when it was unintentional and wrong, and then punish that person, because there's no other alternative in that situation. If you kill someone and you didn't mean to, it doesn't matter. So let's keep going. Ultimately, when we're going to the second major point, like who have we actually killed with drones in comparison to the 0 people they have named that were killed in other methods, I'll give Osama bin Laden. Like the second al-Qaeda officer in Iraq in 2012 was killed by by drones, the first Al-Qaeda officer in Pakistan was killed in 2012, as well as the first in Somalia just 6 to 7 months ago, and 3 of the top 5 officers in Yemen in the past 5 years. That is all you've gotten with drones, and that was in their early research and development stage, when you were still killing about 68% militants in those areas. Now that we've definitely sized up the numbers as far as the civilians that we're killing, we know that potentially we are much better off with drones. But let's go to my second point, that drones are better for future conflict. When we're looking forward to how the United States should act militarily, which is everything that this round comes down to, you're going to do things much better with drones because of the basically the tactical edge that you're going to be able to have with them. Now, what we can definitely see from these is that we need to be able to contain certain powers, such as the IS, when we're going over military operations. But let's not make the same mistakes that we made before. Let's go towards this different route where we can actually focus on creating a no-fly zone within major borders of IS containment, and then bringing in drones to those major areas in order to cause surveillance. Then when violence is seen against citizens, they can actually fire against them. That's the way we have killed dozens of these operatives, and the way that we should be doing it. We can't do this by any other means. But at the same time, we need to target specific areas on which IS is gaining economic interest, especially when they're making $2 million a day off of electricity that they're selling to the Syrian government. They're so powerful in that country that they can do this illegally and get away with it. We need to target where this is happening. We need to target specifically where the arms trade is happening, and ultimately use sentry drones to find out where exactly this is occurring. And at the point where we are seeing more and more of these instances being struck by drones and seeing the economic benefits of the IS significantly depleting, we know we need to move forward with the strategy, especially when the research and development is so geared on causing less lives to be lost, and every other military method really is geared on killing more individuals with more powerful weapons and more technology. But we can see when you're talking about drone warfare, the technology actually goes to killing less people and killing people much more effectively and efficiently, so that the United States can actually do the military job it ideally wants to do.
House thanks the honored member for his edifying remarks. To the quick. 7 minutes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this debate. It's been a great tournament and excellent round so far. Before we get into this, before I get into my 2 points I'm going to bring to you, I'm going to give you a little bit of rebuttal. But before I go into my rebuttal, I'll give you my 2 points. As my partner touched on, we're going to talk about 2 things. Technology should be limited for the sake of legitimacy and control, and then limiting the engagement through thought and understanding is the best thing that the U.S. can do. So before I get into those, we heard from the previous speaker how we can go into this idea that the U.S. has to do this because it's the most efficient and it's the easiest way to do this. And we on our side of on the House, we as my partner has brought to you, that is not the best way to do things. We shouldn't be worried about going to war and trying to figure out how this is the most efficient. We're talking about innocent people and probably a lot of innocent people that are dying as a result. And we're looking at this as an efficient argument, where we shouldn't be looking at that in that way. What we should be doing is we should be looking at this as this is war. This is something that the U.S. is getting engaged in many conflicts throughout the war. Why are they engaged? Because it's so easy for them to say, let's just send this over here, we can kill these people here, and we don't think that that's the most efficient thing. That's not the best thing to do. We think by allowing efficiency to thrive, you're allowing the U.S. to go and try to expand their horizons and try to push their imperialistic values on so many different countries and send drones to so many different countries where it actually becomes a negative thing. That's why the U.S. has a negative reputation, because we're sending these drones to so many different places throughout the world, and we're actually killing a lot of people, and it actually detracts from the overall thing that we're doing in the United States. That is the problem that we're trying to solve on our side of the house, and that's what we're trying to solve by getting rid of these drones that are going over and dropping bombs and running away like the U.S. was never there. We see that as a problem, not this time. So when we going to my first point, as technology should be limited for the sake of legitimacy and control. As my partner brought to you, we talk about how our drones can get in the wrong hands. And how is that such a negative thing? When we look at this, we see that the U.S. has actually allowed their drones to get into the hands of other countries, and we see that as a negative. Why is that a negative? Because now you have countries that have access to our technology. Why is that a bad thing? The reason why that is a bad thing is because once they get access to our technology, they have the ability to infiltrate us from multiple ways where we can't actually go through and protect our people anymore. What happens when countries like Iran or possibly North Korea or any other country that wants to come at us, or potentially people like ISIS who truly want to take the United States off the map. What happens when they get hands on this technology that are flying around? As we've alluded to in my partner's argument, this can already happen. It already has happened. And this potential is not okay. We can't allow this to happen. If we put a control over this, as my partner said, it is hard. You cannot really just fly up and tell a fighter jet to land. No, that pilot has a fight or fear aspect to it. He is going to continue to fight, and he's not going to allow the U.S. to get into this. But before I go on, go ahead.
The amount that the U.S. spends on research and development is more than the next 25 countries' military assets combined. So with that said, like, we're researching and developing so much more than any other nation that even if China didn't already give that information to Iran because they make drones too, as opening Gov said, you get a situation in which, unfortunately, like on your side, all of those negatives are still definitely there, and unfortunately, you don't actually have the United States making the mistake of leaving the drones. The drone technology was already operated by China in the first place.
Well, when we look at this, we're trying to limit how much of this technology can get to the rest of the people that we're actually fighting. We don't want this technology to get out anymore. Yes, China might have had some kind of hand in it, but we don't want to continue to let this get into the hands of people like North Korea, ISIS, or whoever else. Okay, when we look at this, we see that there is inherent negative behind that. We see that there is a greater positive by putting, F-18s in the air, F-22s and Raptors. We see that that is a viable option. The reason why we still invest in these things is because the U.S. sees this as a viable and one of the best options that we can use. That's why we send airplanes to do these high value targets, because we see that the greatest potential is when we have this, and that's when we see that the U.S. is still investing in this because they see that the potential is still going to be prevalent, and the use of drones is actually not the best thing, because if it was such a good thing, then the U.S. would actually get rid of the pilot program as a whole. But it sees the necessity for this. So I get into my second point now this time: limiting engagement through thought and understanding. So when we think about this, we think, why is the U.S. is kind of all over the place at this point. When people outside the U.S. look at the U.S., they're like, why do we have so many airstrikes going on in these random areas? Why does this happen? This, as my partner alluded to, this forces the U.S. to think about what they're doing. This forces the U.S. to say, to limit their imperialistic values. When you're saying, I can't just go overseas and drop a bomb, because now I have to really truly think about what I'm doing. When you're putting boots on the ground, when you're actually investing in these troops, it allows you to think about the war that you're going into. When you're putting drones over, you don't really get the idea of, oh, this is war, because you're sending drones, and it doesn't have the same negative aspect to it as sending troops. Why, when people look at war overall, they say when you put President Obama to say, what do you want to do as far as Ukraine? Do you want to put, or as far as Syria? Do you want to send war? Do you want to put any form of war tactics over there? The president often says, yes, let's send, but people say, well, what about putting boots on the ground? That's when people say no. That's when people are saying, no, this is too far. But the thing is, we need to dial back and realize that dropping bombs in general at all is too far. And the U.S. is allowing this lack of understanding of war. It allows them to say, it's okay to drop bombs, but it's not okay to kill our people. It allows the U.S. to understand what they are truly doing as far as war. War is not something that should be trivialized by the U.S. government. This is actually something that we're trying to show that the United States has to think about what they're doing, and by them looking at war for more than just drones, it is something that it's bigger than just these things flying in the air. There's people being killed, and the people that want this drone program to continue to happen, they're pretty much ignoring a lot of these people, and they're seeing these people as just bodies being lost. As my partner talked to you, we see that this is the best thing that is possible by allowing the United States to understand what is the best thing, and by doing this, we greatly propose this motion. Thank you.
The House thanks the Whip for his closing remarks, and a thank you to the proposition team. Madam Whip, it's 7 minutes.
What my partner and I understand and stand for today is that you can't eliminate eliminate a tactic in the military as being a tool just because you maybe don't like everything it does. We think that you have to recognize that it's more likely to be effective, it's more likely to be useful for the United States military to utilize than it would be to shut it away, never develop the technology, and never utilize the technology that's already been developed. We think that there is efficacy that exists, there are examples where it has been beneficial, and for these reasons it is not something that the United States military should completely ban from being utilized. So what are my points of summarization going to be before I do a little bit of direct attention to what we heard coming out of the previous speaker? Firstly, I want to look at efficacy of drones and contributions as a military tool, and secondly, I want to look at the idea of morality and international relations. Before I get into those 2 points, very quickly, what did we hear coming out of the previous speaker? So he talks about this idea of technology and its legitimacy, and the idea of being able to control your own technology. He says that the development of technology falls into the wrong hands, thus we should not develop that technology or utilize it in the first place. We think that's problematic. If every military decided not to utilize a technology or a possible form of warfare simply because someone else may eventually learn it too, then we think that would be highly problematic and get in the way of a lot of efficacy for any military who's trying to come up with new tactics. Like, the fact of the matter is, maybe, yeah, that doesn't fall into other hands, but that doesn't mean that tool in the first place isn't efficacious to begin with. We think at the point where you hear what my partner tells you that goes fully, almost nearly completely unrebutted by the other speaker, you have to recognize that that is stuff that makes it efficacious to utilize, is something that you should continue to utilize when you're a military that has to make the best decision calculus for what resources you have in a way to preserve your own people, in order to preserve your own state and the people back home who are your civilians, and that is your first job as a nation and as a state to begin with. He tells you that it makes it easier to go into war. We think the other side of the coin, though, is that if you have to think about something tougher, like boots on the ground, or something that's going to require more utilization of tools or whatever, you'll have less support to go into these things in the first place where they might be necessary. The public is less likely to support the United States intervention if it's with boots to, say, help people who are dealing with the situation with ISIS in the Middle East. Whereas when the U.S. utilizes drone strikes and other form of strikes together, we see that you have the international community that is supporting the United States decision to do this, and you have the people inside of the United States who are also supporting the decision to do this. We think it garners the best form of support that actually allows for the effective utilization of these methods in a way that helps more people than it ends up harming at the end of the day. He tells you, actually, I think that mostly covers anything outside of what I want to talk about in my points of summarization. Before I go on, back half, whichever.
Okay, there's a false assumption that putting boots on the ground is zero-sum, that you're either an occupying force or you're not an occupying force. This is not the case. We have seen that we use a direct strike through either other aircraft, as I point out in my POIs, or special operations forces. It's not always an occupying force that's going to be there for years and years and years.
Yeah, you know what, pardon me. You're right, you did talk about that within your speech. We think that just because those are two alternative methods doesn't mean you should get rid of another alternative method. Especially when what my partner tells you is that drones are specifically being enhanced to have the capability to be concentrated, not to have all of the firepower and the large-scale destruction that a lot of the methods they're proposing on their side have. If their issue has to do with morality and civilian death, they're not really fixing that on their side at all, so you can't hold them to that. So moving into efficacy of drones and contributions as a military tool. Like my partner established within his speech, 68% militant fatality rate since 2004, with about 850 militants being killed since 2004. We think that shows that this does have some sort of efficacy, and when a military tactic or tool has efficacy and can be utilized in a concentrated manner, it is something that the military should consider utilization of. He talks about the idea of the second-in-command of Al-Qaeda being killed. We talk about the idea of the most senior Pakistani in Al-Qaeda being killed. We talk about the idea of the head of Uzbekistan's IMU being killed. These are individuals, many more than my partner cited, who have been high-level individuals who were targeted, concentrated, and taken out because of military use of drones. We think that's something that is very important to recognize in this round. If you see efficacy as a a military group, you need to continue to use that weapon. But furthermore, we tell you that it actually ends up being even better than that. We say that you can use drones for surveillance of ISIS members to make sure they're not committing violent actions against the civilian population. In that way, the United States is now taking drone technology and using it as a mechanism for protecting lives abroad. We think that shows that you can actually garner greater benefits for civilian lives than they do on their side when they completely get rid of a technology that is still in development. The years since it has been instituted, it has gotten better and better at targeting and surveillance and doing things that end up helping the United States and other peoples abroad. We think it's important to recognize that you don't get rid of a technology that's developing simply because you've decided there might be one or two problems with it to begin with from the very beginning of when it was first developed. We think you have to recognize that on that alone, efficacy falls on our side. But furthermore, the idea of morality and international relations gets brought up, especially on the front half. In the debate, they talk about this idea of how, morally speaking, the United States should not stand for killing too many civilians. Drone strikes are more likely, they claim, to kill more civilians. What we say to that is you have to recognize, and this gets brought up first half, and I want to remind you of it, that a nation's first moral obligation is not to people abroad, but it's to its own citizens. We think that utilization of military tactics, such as drones, allows you to best preserve your own safety to take out people who may be planning actions against your own citizens. At the point where we take a realist stance when it comes to international relations, we recognize that morality sides with the nation that it is trying to protect. It is the United States military we are talking about here. Thus, they should make military decisions based on how they're going to best protect their military and their people. Morally, we side with that on our side. We think still we win on the idea of civilian death not being as large of a toll as they try to claim on their side. Altogether, we think you recognize that the nation's interests and safety have to come first through their military. We take that and we say that we do that best when we allow for another tool to exist that can be utilized more in the future instead of completely taking it out of your arsenal as a military. We tell you through my partner speech that it's effective. We think that all of these line up with the fact that this is the best decision for the U.S. military to continue to utilize drones in a targeted manner for surveillance and to take out militants who could harm our people. Thank you.
House thanks Madam Witt and side opposition for the closing remarks. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind giving us a little bit of time to deliberate, we'll call you back in the room right now. You're on your seat? Yes.